This is the Voice of America, and you are listening to Nightline Africa. I'm your host, Peter Clote, in Washington. Coming up in the second half of Nightline Africa, a commentary by Dr. James Jonah, former UN Undersecretary General for Political Affairs and Music from our African collection. But first, a new report by the think tank called the International Center for Dialogue Initiatives warns that countries in the Middle East and North Africa will soon face a rise in armed conflict due to climate change. This, as the countries in the Sahel as well as Libya and North Africa are experiencing an escalation of violence. The report says socioeconomic shocks due to inclement weather conditions such as heat waves, massive wildfires, and rising sea levels will lead to loss of livelihoods. They also create an enabling environment for extremist groups to grow their influence and cause more conflict. A major recommendation of the report is calls for the UN Security Council to include the impact of climate change on international security as part of its primary responsibility for maintaining peace and security. For more details on the report, I read Jamal Benomar. He is a former UN Special Envoy for Yemen and UN Under-Secretary General. He is also the chair of the International Center for Dialogue Initiatives.
The report makes a very important point, which is that the devastating effect of climate change, glacial melting, rising sea level, food shortages, all this will create socioeconomic shocks and will result in loss of livelihoods for large swaths of the populations around the world. And competition over scarce resources could lead to conflicts, more mobility, migrations, and tensions. And this is something that we see already happening in Africa. So the drought and environmental degradation that part of the continent is experiencing could trigger a succession of new conflicts and wars. And this is going to be more damaging to the continent than anything that we have seen. And this is the reason why, in the report, we make a number of recommendations.
We are seeing remnants of pieces of conflict here and there, but how soon are we going to see an escalation of these anticipated conflict, especially with the day-to-day happening of climate change and the socio-economic impact that this could have?
I think we are seeing this devastation already and the conflict resulting from that. I think it's happening. It's very clear, what we see in the Sahel. But even some countries that, in theory, are very stable and so on. I was talking to friends from the country where I come from, Morocco, and I was told that I've seen this in the news before, that there have been clashes, between herders who have grazing land and with sedentary populations. There is the issue of water management, issues that's going to appear. And, water has no borders. And, with national government, taking precautionary measures, we see this already clearly with the Nile River and the conflict that has been there now for years and with no prospect of a resolution. This is a conflict that, involve all the countries sharing the water resources of the Nile River.
Mr. Benomar, looking at some of these countries adversely affected by the ongoing climate change, do you think the sub-regional bodies, including ECOWAS, the Horn of Africa, East Africa region, SADC, and perhaps CEMAC in the Central Africa region, under the umbrella of the African Union, will have the capacity to develop this kind of measures or structure to combat this anticipated or escalating conflict that the report enumerated?
Well, the good news about Africa is that Africa has developed a robust mechanism for dealing with conflict and conflict prevention and so on within the African Union. This was a major development. And then the good news is that we see regional organizations taking responsibility, like ECOWAS. We have seen ECOWAS action when it was the crisis in Gambia, we see concerted action of heads of states who often go on mission to the countries concerned. This is good news. And we see similar efforts, in other part of Africa, East Africa, and SADC and so on. To start, I think it's a conversation is needed, within the African Union and other sub-regional organizations. And I'm sure from this discussion, some ideas will emerge on what would be appropriate in terms of new mechanism for addressing these new conflicts.
All right, Mr. Benomar, what are some of the major recommendations contained in the report?
Well, the one thing we can't help observing is that there has been reluctance at the UN to address this issue heads on, although there have been attempts by some members of the Security Council, but there has been pushback. What we are seeing in our report is that the Security Council should include climate change, its effect on international security, as part of its primary responsibility for the maintenance of peace and security. This is an issue that cannot be ignored.
Jamal Benomar is a former UN Special Envoy for Yemen and UN Secretary General. He is also the chair of the International Center for Dialogue Initiatives.